Welcome to the Deconstructionist Deep Dive.
The podcast that doesn't just accept the story.
We break it
We examine the pieces.
and expose the machinery inside.
Let's dive in.
What if everything you've been taught about gender roles and relationships isn't just wrong, but is designed to be wrong? Today, we are putting on our intellectual safety goggles and setting a very clear, ambitious mission. We are not just analyzing some philosophy here.
No, not at all.
We are surgically dismantling a colossal, rigid, patriarchal framework. You know, the one concerning gender, worth, and relational dynamics. This structure, which, so many people internalize as absolute truth, it feels like it's designed, from the ground up, to limit individual possibility.
That's absolutely right. And our source material today is essentially a rigorous analysis of this very structure, a detailed map, of its conceptual nodes and its logical dependencies.
Like an architectural blueprint.
Exactly. An architectural blueprint for control. So
Right.
our task really is to go underneath that glossy surface, expose the load-bearing structures, the axioms this entire framework actually relies on, and crucially, identify every single logical fallacy that allows this structure to keep standing.
Right.
We are giving you, the listener, a shortcut to understanding how these systems maintain their psychological grip, their social power.
Okay, let's unpack this blueprint then, starting right at the bedrock. We begin with what the analysis calls the primary load-bearing structures. Think of these as the unstated, the unquestionable assumptions that must be accepted as universal truth for the entire rigid framework to hold up at all.
Yeah.
If these two pillars fall, the whole system basically collapses into dust.
And this assumption of universality, that's exactly where the framework draws its deepest power. These axioms are never presented as cultural preferences or shaped by history.
No, never.
They are pitched as these inescapable mandates of existence itself.
Precisely. So the first pillar identified is biological determinism. The core claim here is ruthless and simple, really. Human mating strategies, gender roles, even our desires are irrevocably dictated by fixed evolutionary biology. That's the argument.
Right.
This framework insists that men are hardwired biologically to be the hunters, the providers, the protectors. And women are just as firmly fixed as the primary nurturers, the caregivers.
And there's zero wiggle room.
Zero wiggle room allowed for individual choice or, cultural adaptation.
What's fascinating and maybe a bit insidious is the psychological move this framework makes right there.
How so?
By claiming these roles are irrevocable biological destiny, right? It attempts to shut down the argument before it even starts.
Yeah.
If deviation from the script is framed not as just a social choice, but as something unnatural, even biologically flawed, well, then compliance becomes a matter of self-preservation, doesn't it? Not preference.
Yeah, it shifts the whole ground.
It turns choice into this sort of instinctual compulsion, trapping the individual in what the source calls an alleged instinctual cage.
Which flows directly then into the second really aggressive pillar, the provider imperative. So if men are biologically determined to be the providers, then this imperative asserts that the man's fundamental measure of worth is his ability to provision and protect. Period.
Right.
And here's the critical corollary, the other side of that coin. The woman's fundamental desire must be submission to that provider because her security is prioritized above everything else.
And the implication of this imperative, well, it's not subtle, is it? It actively attempts to suppress, modern reality.
Cool.
The framework warns that any deviation from this model, say a woman aggressively seeking professional independence, maybe, or a man prioritizing emotional labor over just high earnings, causes what the framework chillingly calls instinctual unattraction.
Instinctual unattraction. Wow.
Yeah. The relationship is basically promised to fail not due to human compatibility issues or communication breakdown or anything normal, but because the individuals have violated a supposed core biological and economic law. It's quite the claim.
Wait a minute, though. If the biological roles are supposedly so fixed, so absolute, why does the framework need to dedicate so much, psychological infrastructure to managing anxiety? Shouldn't nature just handle the selection process,
That's the brilliant and frankly, deeply manipulative part of the architecture. These two axioms, biological determinism and the provider imperative, they don't stand alone. Not at all.
Okay.
They are supported by a whole scaffolding of key conceptual nodes designed specifically to manage the profound risk and expectation that those very axioms create.
So the axioms create the problem that the other nodes then manage.
Precisely. This system requires constant anxiety to function properly. It feeds on it.
Okay, let's look at the supporting cast then. We see these nodes entirely focused on self-defense, fear, scarcity. Take the concept of self-preservation primacy. This isn't about, like, healthy, rational boundary setting we might talk about elsewhere.
No.
This framework insists that a woman must put herself first, solely as a defensive mechanism against inevitable male abandonment.
Right. It's reactive, not proactive in a healthy sense.
And this necessity for hypervigilance is explicitly fueled by that deep-seated assumption the analysis calls the male abandonment presupposition.
Yeah, the system is basically designed to manufacture untrustworthiness right from the start, doesn't it? It makes proactive self-isolation seem, well, necessary for survival.
Seems like it.
But maybe the most destructive mechanism, the one that truly weaponizes time and self-perception, is the declining stock theory.
Oof. Yeah, that one's harsh.
It is. The cruel crux of this node is that female value is reduced to a temporary market commodity, depreciating strictly based on youth and external attractiveness. That's it.
It's a terrifying threat, and it clearly drives compliance. This framework actively manufactures a sense of, like, existential urgency, the constant grinding threat that women will inevitably be outcompeted by younger women, forcing these hasty decisions based on perceived scarcity. It's brutal.
It absolutely creates a coercive environment. The focus shifts entirely away from internal growth, things like wisdom, skill, character development.
Right, things that actually appreciate with time.
Exactly. And instead, it shifts to desperately maintaining a temporary external commodity. Time itself gets reframed not as an opportunity for accumulation, for growth, but as the ultimate inescapable enemy that you just have to outrun.
And when you feel like you're raising the clock, and you feel powerless against what you're told is an untrustworthy, biologically determined system, well, you start searching for external safety nets, right?
Naturally.
And this leads directly to the node defining marriage as financial safeguard. The framework asserts that since relationships are, at their core, fundamentally transactional.
Which is a huge assumption in itself.
Right. Then the legal system inherently favors the woman financially, thus reducing marriage primarily to just a safe economic bet for the woman.
It's cold. It's a calculated, cold exchange of autonomy for security.
Yeah.
But the framework demands a spiritual price for that financial safety, doesn't it? And that's captured in the concept of the we versus I dichotomy.
The total assimilation idea.
Exactly. The belief instilled is that a healthy marriage requires the complete, unreserved subsumption of individual identity, the I, into the collective one, the we.
So maintaining any unique ambition or sense of self
is framed as an act of treason, something that destabilizes the entire institution. It is, ideological assimilation, pure and simple, spiritual suicide almost.
So if we step back and look at the whole foundation, it's fear, isn't it? A system built on biological inevitability, this rigid economic provision model, and a profound manufactured anxiety over declining value and inevitable abandonment. It is a highly specific, fear-based blueprint designed explicitly to coerce behavior through insecurity.
Okay, so once the framework establishes these really rigid axioms we just discussed, it then charts out this predetermined, almost self-fulfilling prophecy, a path of destruction, basically, for anyone who dares to violate the terms laid out in Part 1.
Right.
And the framework works on people precisely because it presents this deterministic logic model, this chain of causality that appears, on the surface at least, ironclad.
This is the logical dependency mapping section of the analysis, the prescribed downward spiral. And the key rhetorical goal here seems to be showing that bad choices aren't just mistakes people make.
No.
They are the inevitable consequence of rejecting those foundational patriarchal axioms. The framework wants you to believe you have absolutely no agency outside its constraints.
And where does this entire destructive chain supposedly begin? What's the starting point?
Yeah, what's ground zero?
It starts with the absolute start point. Fatherlessness is the root cause. This framework places the absence of a father figure, or maybe just proper masculine guidance, as the primary and necessary cause of all subsequent self-destructive choices and relational failures.
Wow, that's the ultimate reductive fallacy right at the entrance gate, isn't it?
It really is.
It takes incredibly complex societal problems, poverty, lack of opportunity, trauma, systemic issues, and simplifies them all down to a single, personal, and specifically gendered failure.
And it immediately funnels all responsibility away from any systemic issues, doesn't it? Puts it squarely onto the individual and their immediate family structure.
Okay, so if we trace the precise chain reaction presented by the framework, the narrative is just relentless. What's step one after fatherlessness?
Step one. Fatherlessness, according to this logic, leads directly to materialism.
Materialism, okay.
That is, the development of unrealistic desires. The idea is, since the individual lacked proper guidance on self-worth, they seek external validation, financial compensation, creating demands that supposedly cannot possibly be met in a healthy, conventional relationship.
Got it. So unrealistic desires, then what?
Step two. Those unsustainable desires then propel the individual toward fast money, slow problems, seeking immediate, substantial financial gain, often through risky or ethically compromised means.
Like trading long-term stability.
Exactly. Trading the long-term stability offered by the provider imperative for a short-term economic fix. The framework sees this as the sort of desperate compensation for the emotional wound of fatherlessness.
Okay, fast money. Step three. This is where it gets darker, I imagine.
Step three. The framework links those actions directly to sex work. It asserts that, fueled by social media corruption and the drive for unrealistic, materialistic desires, this fast money path inevitably results in the commodification of the self.
Inevitably.
That's the word they use. It's presented as the only logical outcome of unbridled materialism, which stemmed from fatherlessness.
Wait a minute, though. This is where the internal logic starts feeling deeply manipulative, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, because once that choice to commodify worth is made, the declining stock theory, remember that one, accelerates dramatically.
It comes back with a vengeance.
Big time. The framework dictates a swift, total depreciation of worth. The individual, having already violated the provider imperative by not securing a provider early, is now locked into a trajectory that rapidly consumes her value in the relational marketplace.
And because that value is supposedly gone, the framework says instability is confirmed. So step five.
Step five. This rapidly triggers the male abandonment presupposition. It comes roaring back.
Of course.
The framework dictates that the instability created by the individual's choices validates the original fear. The man, being biologically programmed for stable provision, will inevitably depart. See, it proves the initial axiom.
It's a closed loop.
Completely. And step six, this is the explicit punishment phase that really seals the fate. The lower status male corollary.
Lower status male, what does that mean?
This states that those who followed the spiral, specifically sex workers in this narrative, have burned their relational bridges so thoroughly that they can now only attract inferior, non-providing, or low-status men.
Wow. So it guarantees...
It seals the individual's fate, guaranteeing that they will never find the stable provision required by the provider imperative. It's a life sentence, according to the framework.
So the end state of this whole toxic seven-step chain is therefore presented as inevitable relationship failure. There's no other possible outcome.
None.
What's truly revealing, though, is that this entire structure, from fatherlessness right down to total failure, is presented as the non-negotiable consequence of deviating from those foundational axioms we started with: biological determinism and the provider imperative.
And what is so deceptive about it, so powerful psychologically, is that the structure entirely forecloses the possibility of resilience, doesn't it? Or alternative success paths, or considering systemic factors, or even simple human agency.
Yeah, it just shuts it all down.
It acts like a cool form of moral gravity. Once you step off the approved, very narrow path, this deterministic chain ensures you fall. And it provides this neat, closed-loop explanation for failure, placing all the blame squarely on the individual for deviating from the prescribed gender hierarchy.
It is a stunning piece of intellectual architecture, I have to say.
Yeah.
Designed purely for psychological coercion. Okay. We've observed the architecture, we've traced its supposed logic. Now we take out the scalpel, right? Time to dissect the framework itself.
Exactly.
We aren't just criticizing the outcome anymore. We are looking at the internal flaws, the logical contradictions, the structural weaknesses where the entire architecture is most unstable.
Right. If this framework is designed to function as some kind of immune system for the mind, rejecting all non-compliant thoughts, then we are its virus.
I like that.
Pointing out the self-defeating and often hypocritical programming it runs on.
Okay, let's start with the high priority vulnerabilities, the fundamental weaknesses in those primary axioms themselves. Let's do it. First, that core claim of biological determinism. The critique here is simple, but I think devastating. It's a reductionist axiom. It's fundamentally reductionist.
Explain that.
It attempts to take the totality of human behavior, which is shaped by incredibly complex forces like culture, economics, technology, individual choice, history, Everything.
Everything. And reduce it down to base, fixed biology. It's like trying to explain the entire global economy using only the principles of, I don't know, gravity.
Right. It explains almost nothing of interest. It misses the actual complexity.
Exactly. And the evidence of its failure is, well, it's overwhelming when you look. This claim of irrevocable fixed roles is absolutely contradicted by the sheer existence of diverse gender arrangements and relational contracts across human societies throughout history.
Right. Both past and contemporary societies show huge variation.
If these roles were truly biologically mandatory, every single human society would look basically identical in this regard, wouldn't they?
They would have to.
And they demonstrably do not, which proves the framework is culturally contingent, it's specific, it's not naturally universal.
Okay, so that's a major crack in the first pillar. What about the second?
Moving to the provider imperative, the structural weakness is its claim to universality again. This is a classic rhetorical move, actually.
The framework takes a culturally specific model, specifically that highly rigid, post-industrial Western patriarchal structure, and attempts to present it as a universal, mandatory law of nature, applicable across all time and all places.
But again, just like with determinism, this claim falls apart instantly when we look beyond that narrow cultural slice, doesn't it?
Instantly. It is contradicted by the success of egalitarian partnerships, where provision is shared based on competence or mutual agreement, not fixed gender roles.
And also by communal provision societies, where resources are controlled by the collective, not individually controlled by one gender based on some imperative.
Exactly. These examples prove that the male provider model is a choice. It's a social contract that can be negotiated, not some biological mandate you have to obey.
Okay, so both core axioms are shaky. What else?
And then there is the profoundly damaging declining stock theory. This is vulnerable because it relies on reducing complex human worth to a simple, fungible market commodity.
Like a used car. Yeah.
Exactly. Like a used car that only moves in one direction, down. It turns the very concept of character, of accumulated experience, into temporary currency.
And it creates this horrible self-fulfilling prophecy of obsolescence, right? Designed specifically to maximize young women's anxiety and ensure early compliance with the provider imperative.
Yeah, lock it down while you still have value.
And what this theory conveniently ignores, conveniently forgets, are the things that actually make human beings valuable over time. The accumulation of character, wisdom, specialized knowledge, experiential value.
Things that are gained with age, not lost.
Exactly. Gained, not depreciated. By defining worth only by youth and, frankly, surface-level appeal, the framework preemptively dismisses the contribution and value of all mature individuals. It's incredibly ageist, fundamentally.
Okay, those are the big ones. Now let's look at the medium priority vulnerabilities, these internal logical gaps the framework seems to create to manage cognitive dissonance and allow people to participate somehow.
Right, the little cheats it uses.
The most baffling of these, I think, is the identity-labor separation, which the analysis terms the compartmentalization fallacy.
Ah, yes. This is a breathtaking act of mental gymnastics, isn't it?
It really is.
The claim is that one's profession, specifically sex work, in the downward spiral mapping we discussed, can be completely separated from core personal values and identity.
Right, like you can somehow protect a supposed inner purity while participating in the very actions the framework itself demonizes.
But the logical incoherence is just. It's blindingly obvious, isn't it? Integrity means alignment.
Yeah.
One's values are fundamentally demonstrated through one's actions, particularly actions taken for livelihood or survival. To claim this separation is possible is a fundamental denial of integrity. It forces a profound form of self-alienation.
It sounds like a mechanism to allow people to participate in the marketplace of commodified sexuality while still feeling like they haven't morally compromised who they are at their core.
Exactly. It's a denial of reality engineered by the framework itself to patch its own contradictions.
Okay, and finally, in this section.
And finally, we have the sweeping generalization of male fickleness, that necessary presupposition that men are inherently untrustworthy, driven solely by base instinct, and will inevitably abandon women.
Right, the male abandonment presupposition again.
While relational instability is obviously a real problem for many people, this generalization is contradicted by the vast historical record of male fidelity, mutual partnership, and long-term commitment that actually forms the core of stable families and communities across time.
So why include it so prominently?
It serves only one purpose within the framework's logic: to fuel the paranoia necessary for the self-preservation primacy node to remain a relevant command. Without that constant fear of abandonment, the framework loses its coercive power. It needs you to believe men are fundamentally unreliable, so you'll accept the protection offered by submitting to the provider imperative.
Okay, so we've successfully established, I think, that this framework is internally flawed. It relies on logical gaps, reductionist arguments, internal contradictions.
Yeah, it's pretty shaky on its own terms. But now we need to expand the lens drastically. We need to show that this system isn't just locally weak, internally inconsistent. It's fundamentally contradicted by the vast, rich global history of philosophical thought and diverse societal models.
Right. We're taking a deep dive into the library of human thought, basically, to prove this patriarchal framework is not the default setting of humanity. It's just one rather poorly constructed pamphlet in a massive library.
Exactly. Let's start by countering biological determinism again, but this time from the outside. We don't have to invent a counter-argument. We can pull from centuries of established theory that fundamentally disagrees with the idea that biology is destiny.
Okay, where do we start?
Well, first, classic feminist theory, right? Pioneered by figures like Simone de Beauvoir, she fundamentally challenged the notion of biology as destiny.
Her famous line, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman."
Precisely. Positioning gender primarily as a social construct, a performance or role we learn and internalize through culture, not some fixed biological imperative we're born with.
And building on that.
Taking that further, you have postmodernism, especially through the work of someone like Judith Butler. Butler views the very enforcement of biology as destiny as what she calls a normative discourse.
Okay.
Basically, a linguistic and social tool designed specifically to police behavior and limit the messy, wonderful spectrum of human expression. The framework says, this is what you are biologically. Butler argues that command itself is how power tries to shape you.
That's a powerful distinction.
It is. And we find deep counterpoints outside the Western tradition, too. Look at the core tenets of Buddhism, for instance.
How does that apply?
Its emphasis on detachment from ego, from fixed identity, and even from the physical form fundamentally negates biological primacy as a rule for determining complex relationship structures or individual worth. Your value, in that view, is based on enlightenment, your path to it, not your reproductive utility or your assigned gender role.
Makes sense.
And this is also the point where we really must pause and acknowledge a severe historical parallel noted in the source materials. This framework relies on rhetorical mechanisms disturbingly similar to those previously leveraged by scientific racism.
Wow. Okay, explain that connection.
Because both ideologies employ biological determinism to justify an existing social hierarchy. Scientific racism claimed biological superiority or inferiority to justify colonialism and slavery. This patriarchal framework claims biological fixation on roles to justify provision and submission.
It's the same rhetorical machine.
Applied to control a different population, it's using biology as a cover for enforcing a power structure.
That context is absolutely vital.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's move to refuting the provider imperative from the outside. This rigid idea of mandated male provision and female dependency. Well, it crumbles when exposed to ethical and economic systems that prioritize individual virtue or shared responsibility.
Absolutely. Consider Stoicism, for example, an ancient philosophy that's having a bit of a modern resurgence.
Right. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca.
Exactly. Stoicism prioritizes self-reliance, emotional fortitude, and virtue, the cultivation of character for all individuals, regardless of gender. In the Stoic view, dependency isn't a strategic choice, it's a philosophical weakness.
So the dependency model inherent in the provider imperative
is completely irrelevant to a well-lived, virtuous Stoic life. It just doesn't compute.
Okay, and economically?
Yeah.
How is the provider imperative challenged?
Well, it's brilliantly refuted by Marxist feminism, particularly from thinkers like Silvia Federici. Federici defines unpaid domestic labor, that supposed nurturing role the framework champions, not as some innate biological calling, but as a highly effective yet unpaid economic control mechanism. The framework insists the woman is merely nurturing. Federici says she is an exploited, subsidized laborer whose unpaid work helps maintain capitalist profitability by supporting the male workforce for free.
That reframes it completely.
It does. And from a foundational definitional standpoint, you have queer theory. It immediately dismantles the categorical certainty of man and woman upon which the entire provider imperative absolutely depends.
Because the imperative needs fixed opposing roles.
Exactly. If those binaries are fluid, multiple, or self-chosen constructs, the imperative, which relies entirely on that rigid binary, has no foundational logic left to stand on. It just dissolves.
And the real-world proof of alternatives kind of seals the deal, doesn't it?
It really does. We have the well-documented example of matrilineal societies like the Mosuo people in China.
Where lineage and property pass through the mother's side.
Precisely. Property, lineage, economic power run through the women. Their entire societal structure renders the male provider model basically irrelevant because economic power and stability rest elsewhere. It demonstrates clearly that the provider imperative is entirely contingent on local economic tradition, not some universal biological law.
So it's a choice, not a mandate.
And the sources drive home the historical reality here. The provider imperative model closely mirrors the dependency frameworks utilized in patriarchal feudalism.
The lord and vassal comparison again.
Where the vassal exchanged freedom and labor for protection and land from the lord. It is an ancient bargain-trading autonomy for perceived security repackaged for modern times as biological necessity.
So it's an economic system disguised as an evolutionary truth.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Okay, so we've established the blueprints are flawed, the internal logic is contradictory, and the entire structure is pretty thoroughly refuted by global philosophy and diverse societies. Now, we need to get inside the mind of the architect, so to speak.
Right.
We have to identify the specific psychological tools, the deceptive framing used to convince the target audience that this rickety, unsupported structure is somehow their only safe home. How do they sell this thing?
This is what the analysis calls the deception matrix. We're identifying the specific points where the framework demands the individual surrender their autonomy in exchange for managing the very anxiety the framework itself created in the first place.
It's a protection racket.
In a psychological sense, yeah. Let's name the control techniques used to normalize the system. First, we have the law of the jungle.
Okay.
Its power source is clearly the axiom of biological determinism, and its intended psychological impact is resignation. Resignation to an instinctual cage.
Right. The framework tells you, you have no choice. You are a fixed animal. These roles are nature's decree. Just accept it.
Then there is the deeply cynical provider-protector false dichotomy. Its power source is derived from traditional patriarchy, often reinforced by religious doctrine, and its impact is making you trade your autonomy for an illusory form of security.
This is the feudal bargain we talked about. Revisit it.
Exactly. Submit to the hierarchical role and you'll supposedly be safe. Step outside that role and you're exposed to the elements, vulnerable.
The most profoundly dehumanizing tool, I think, has to be the depreciating asset dehumanization.
Oof, yeah. That one is brutal. Powered jointly by capitalist market logic and patriarchy.
A toxic combination.
Indeed. Its impact is forcing the individual into constant self-monitoring as a decaying commodity, a constant calculation of their market value based on external factors.
And the historical parallel noted in the analysis is truly chilling here. This logic is identical to a slave market appraisal.
It really is, where human worth is assessed purely based on temporary physical qualities and perceived utility, completely divorced from inherent value or character.
Unbelievable. Okay, what's next?
And we return to that impossible logical gap that allows participation while preserving some shred of self-identity, the Cartesian stripper or the compartmentalization deception.
Right, I'm just doing a job defense.
Exactly. Powered by the demands of capital, the necessity sometimes to rationalize morally questionable actions for financial survival, its impact is massive self-alienation and integrity fracture. This is the psychological mechanism of detachment.
That manifests as, I'm just doing a job. Or, historically, the parallel of just following orders. A means of denying the moral weight of one's own actions.
Precisely. And finally, the ultimate assimilation tool used to enforce the submission required by the provider imperative, the we as erasure of I, false unity.
Sacrificing the self for the unit.
Its impact is described in the source as spiritual suicide through assimilation, sacrificing the unique creative self to the uniformity of the group unit, the relationship unit.
This is rhetoric straight out of the totalitarian state playbook, isn't it? Where the state, or in this case, the rigid institutional role, is everything, and the complex individual is basically nothing, an inconvenience.
Critically, though, we have to expose the logical fallacy deployment that underpins all this rhetoric. How do they make these claims sound plausible?
Right, the errors in thinking.
The most central logical error, which serves as the foundation for its law of the jungle claims, is the naturalistic fallacy.
Explain that one again.
It's the assumption that simply because something is biologically observed or maybe just socially common, it must automatically be what should be morally right or universally mandatory. It's that unearned leap from description to prescription, from is to ought.
Got it. And they also rely heavily on the reductive fallacy, right, which we saw so clearly in that fatherlessness chain reaction.
Absolutely. The framework reduces profoundly complex human phenomenal relationships, economic struggles, societal crises to a single, easily traceable cause like lack of a father.
Which conveniently diverts focus away from uncomfortable systemic, economic, or cultural factors that truly influence outcomes. Much easier to blame individuals.
It's much easier. And to ensure compliance, this whole structure relies on activating specific emotional leverage points. It plays on the deepest human vulnerabilities in order to sell the illusion of protection it offers.
So it activates the acute fear of abandonment and destitution that is baked right into the male abandonment presupposition.
It drives the fear of future regret if you don't play the game correctly and, monetize your youthful value early enough.
And it constantly wields that overarching, crushing fear of obsolescence, the declining stock theory, to keep the individual running frantically on the compliance treadmill.
This framework isn't designed to empower you to choose better relationships. It's designed entirely to leverage your deepest insecurities. It traps people by promising protection from the very anxieties that its own axioms meticulously manufacture. It's a closed loop of fear creation and supposed fear management.
Okay. We have spent this deep dive methodically dismantling, exposing, and refuting this framework, really, point by point. Now, for the crucial so what does this mean for you, the listener?
Yeah, what is the single central deception we have exposed that, once you really see it, dissolves the illusion?
The framing error, I think, is the core of it all. The fundamental deception is framing human relationships, and importantly, one's own essential worth, as a rigid, deterministic system based on immutable biological laws and cold, hard economic laws. This framing aggressively forecloses any possibility of genuine creativity or mutual negotiation or shared, evolving construction within relationships. It says, here are the rules, obey them.
When the reality we have demonstrated through philosophy, through diverse societies, through internal critique is the precise opposite. Relationships are, instead, a fluid field of possibility.
Right.
Built fundamentally on continuous consent, authentic, self-chosen agreement, and mutual respect. They are not legalistic contracts you must obey. They are worlds that two or more agents collaboratively choose to build and iterate upon together.
And the entire system's power, its psychological grip, relies entirely on the singular rhetorical trick. It takes contingent social arrangements.
Things that are culturally specific.
Exactly. Culturally specific, sometimes highly profitable ideas about provision and gender roles, and presents them as inevitable natural laws, universal, non-negotiable truths.
And once you understand that deep distinction between a contingent cultural choice and an inevitable natural law, the illusion just divests. It dissolves completely. The cage doors swing open.
Which brings us, finally, to the liberation counterpremise. The way out of this psychological cage is actually simple, but profoundly powerful. Freedom emerges when you consciously reject these predetermined scripts. And you choose instead to create relational models based on authentic self-chosen agreement rather than compliance with imposed hierarchies or those manufactured anxieties we've dissected. You, the individual, choose the roles, the terms, and the value system.
So this entire patriarchal framework, as we've seen, relies heavily on manufactured fear of abandonment, and maybe most centrally that insidious declining stock theory.
Right. It tells you that your value is inherently temporary, inherently depreciating, designed to run out like a clock.
So we leave you with this provocation, building on everything we've torn apart today. If the framework's power lies in the belief that your worth is just some market commodity that decays over time, what would a relationship model built entirely on mutual, non-depreciating growth, on character development, and on shared wisdom actually look like?
And that's our deep dive for this week.
Remember, the most dangerous illusion is the one you don't know you're in.
But now you know. So here's our question for you. So we've torn apart the patriarchal playbook. Now the real question is, what is the one idea about relationships or your own worth that you're finally ready to put on the chopping block?
Let us know in the comments. Question the narrative. Deconstruct the dogma. See the system.
We'll see you next time. Stay skeptical. Thank you for joining us.